Somewhere right now, a 79-year-old man is sitting in a house he bought in 1987 for $80,000. That house is worth $620,000 today. He has a stock portfolio, a pension, a savings account his kids don't even know exists, and he is part of a generation that is about to pass down more money than any generation in the history of civilization. The question is not whether this wealth transfer is happening. It is already happening. The question is, are you positioned to benefit from it, or are you going to watch the biggest financial shift of your lifetime pass you by while someone else gets rich? If nobody in your circle is talking about this, smash that like button, because that's exactly why this video exists. I'm Alex. I study the financial systems, economic patterns, and behavioral decisions that separate people who build wealth from people who simply watch it move around them. And today, I'm going to show you exactly what this wealth transfer is, why it creates a once-in-a-generation opportunity, and the specific moves you can make right now to position yourself on the right side of it. Let's get into it. Part 1. We have been here before. To understand where we are going, you need to understand where we have been. About 80 years ago, the world was coming out of World War II, and the financial picture in America looked brutal. Home ownership was sitting around 44%. Most people simply could not afford to buy a house. Sound familiar? National debt relative to the size of the economy was over 100%, meaning the country owed more than it produced. Sound familiar? And inflation was crushing people. Prices were rising faster than wages. People were struggling to afford basic things. Sound familiar? Here is what today looks like. The average first-time home buyer is now 40 years old, the oldest ever recorded, because housing has become so expensive that an entire generation delayed ownership by a decade. Consumer debt just broke records. Inflation, though cooling, still has millions of people making impossible choices every month. And our national debt to GDP ratio, that measure of how much the country owes versus how much it produces, is now sitting above 120%, higher than it was coming out of World War II. History does not repeat exactly, but it rhymes loudly. And here is what happened last time the rhyme played out. Part 2. What happened last time? After World War II, the government made a series of decisions that completely restructured who owned wealth in America. Veterans taught access to free education. Zero down payment mortgages were introduced. Unemployment support and business loans flooded into the economy. And what happened next was extraordinary. Home ownership jumped from 44% to over 60% in less than 10 years. The national debt burden on the country fell dramatically. Wages began outpacing inflation, and a massive middle class was born almost overnight. Ordinary people who understood what was happening and positioned themselves correctly by owning homes, starting businesses, investing in the expanding economy, built generational wealth that their families are still living off of today. The people who waited, who said it was too complicated, who said they didn't have enough money to participate, they watched. And this is where it gets important, because right now, in 2026, a different but equally significant shift is already underway, and most people have no idea it is happening. Part 3. The transfer that is already in motion. Here is the number you need to understand. Baby boomers, people born between 1946 and 1964, make up less than 20% of the population in the United States. But they own more than 50% of the country's total wealth, half of everything. And the oldest baby boomers are turning 80 right now. Over the next 20 years, researchers estimate that somewhere between $80 trillion and $90 trillion in wealth is going to move from one generation to the next, through inheritance, through estate transfers, through the liquidation of assets that older Americans have spent their entire lives accumulating. This is not speculation. The math is already locked in. The only variable is who ends up on the right side of it. Now here is where most people get this wrong. They hear wealth transfer and they think it only benefits people with rich parents, and they check out. But that thinking is exactly what keeps people broke. Because here's what actually happens when trillions of dollars change hands. Part 4. Why you don't need rich parents to win. When people receive inherited money, financial research shows one consistent pattern. Most of it gets spent. Not invested, spent. New cars, home renovations, vacations, lifestyle upgrades. The moment money feels like a windfall rather than something that was earned, the psychological relationship with it completely changes, and it moves through people's hands faster than almost any other kind of money. And this is where it gets interesting for you as an investor, because when money gets spent, it doesn't disappear. It moves, it flows. Into businesses, into real estate, into healthcare, into consumer goods. And the people who own those assets, the companies, the properties, the funds, are the ones who capture that wealth. Think about it this way. When the government sent out stimulus checks during the pandemic, the people who got rich were not the ones receiving the checks. The people who got rich were the ones who owned Amazon, owned Walmart, owned the platforms where that money was immediately spent. The wealth transfer works the same way. You do not need to inherit money to benefit from a wealth transfer. You need to own the assets where that money is going to land. And this is where most people stay stuck, because they think investing is something you do when you have a lot of money. But the people who build wealth understand that investing is how you build a lot of money. You start with what you have, and you own a piece of what's growing. So the question becomes, what specific assets are positioned to benefit from the biggest wealth transfer in history? Let me walk you through 4 of them. Asset 1. Real estate. Baby boomers own more than 40% of all residential real estate in the United States. As this generation ages, 2 things are going to happen. Some will downsize, selling large family homes and moving into smaller properties or retirement communities. Others will pass properties directly to their children, many of whom will then sell rather than hold. Both scenarios point towards a significant increase in housing supply over the coming decade. And increased supply historically creates buying opportunities, lower prices, better terms, more options for people who are prepared and positioned to move when the moment arrives. If you want exposure to real estate without buying a physical property, real estate investment funds give you access to the broader real estate market, residential, commercial, healthcare facilities, without the complexity of direct ownership. You're owning a piece of the asset class, not the headache of being a landlord. The opportunity here is not about timing the market perfectly. It's about being in the market when the shift accelerates. Asset 2. Healthcare. Here's a simple truth that creates a massive financial opportunity. As people age, they need more healthcare, more medications, more procedures, more assisted living, more medical devices, more home care technology, more long-term care facilities. With the largest generation in American history moving through their 70s and 80s over the next 2 decades, healthcare spending is not a question mark, it's a mathematical certainty. The companies building the infrastructure, developing the pharmaceuticals, running the senior living facilities, and creating the technology that supports aging populations are going to see sustained demand for years to come. Healthcare-focused investment funds give you broad exposure to this entire sector, pharmaceutical companies, biotech, medical devices, insurance, without having to pick individual winners in an industry that moves fast and punishes bad bets. This is not a trend, this is demographics, and demographics do not lie. Asset 3. Dividend-paying assets. Here's something interesting happening among younger investors right now. As millennials and Gen Z start receiving inheritances and thinking about how to deploy that money, research is showing a growing preference for income-generating investments, not just growth, cash flow. This matters because when a large wave of new money flows into dividend-focused assets, demand for those assets rises, and when demand rises, the value of what you already own rises with it. Dividend investing means owning companies that pay you simply for holding a piece of them. Every quarter, a payment lands in your account, not because you sold anything, not because you timed the market, just because you own a piece of a profitable business that shares its earnings with its owners. The compounding effect of reinvesting those dividends over time, putting the cash payments back into buying more shares, is one of the quietest and most powerful wealth-building mechanisms that exists. If the coming wealth transfer accelerates a trend towards income investing, being already positioned in high-quality dividend assets means you benefit twice, once from the cash flow and again from the increased demand. Asset 4. The broad economy. Sometimes the smartest move is not trying to predict which specific sector wins, it's owning everything.
When $80 trillion moves through an American economy over the next 2 decades, through spending, through investing, through business formation, the broad economy grows. Not every company wins, not every sector performs equally, but the overall tide rises. Total market funds give you ownership of thousands of companies across every sector of the American economy in a single investment. You're not betting on one horse, you're owning the entire race. If millennials spend their inheritance at restaurants, you benefit. If Gen Z invests in tech, you benefit. If the housing market expands, you benefit because you own a piece of all of it. This is how ordinary people with ordinary incomes have built extraordinary wealth over long periods of time. Not by finding the perfect stock, by consistently owning a broad piece of a growing economy and letting time do what it always does. Let's bring this together. The biggest wealth transfer
in human history is not coming. It has already started. Baby boomers own half of America's wealth. They are aging. And over the next 20 years, that wealth is going to move through inheritance, through spending, through asset liquidation in ways that will reshape the financial landscape for every generation below them. You do not need rich parents to benefit. You need to understand where the money is going and own a piece of it before it arrives. Real estate, because 40% of American housing is about to change hands, and supply increases create buying opportunities. Healthcare, because aging demographics guarantee sustained spending in this sector for decades. Dividend assets, because a new generation of investors is moving toward income and early positioning pays twice. The broad economy, because when trillions move through a system, owning everything means you capture what you cannot predict. The people who built wealth after World War II were not smarter than everyone else. They were positioned. They understood that wealth does not appear from nowhere. It transfers. It moves. It flows toward people who own assets and away from people who only spend. The transfer is happening right now. The only question is which side of it you are standing on. Because the difference between being stuck and being free is not income. It is behavior repeated quietly over time.